Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today I just figured I would share the birth stories from my two labor and deliveries. Obviously they're not super current because my son's 9 months, so this is a birth story just 9 months later. But before we get into the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the like button, and let's get into it. One thing I do want to add is with my first pregnancy, I did gain, I think it was right at 25 pounds. Yeah, it was like 23, 25, something like that. That I gained to my first pregnancy. I just kind of ate whatever I wanted. Yeah. When I had a craving, I just ate it. But, so my original due date with my daughter was October 10th, of 2016. So that was 40 weeks. So October 11th, I went in to my, OB for my 40-week appointment. And they kind of just did the normal, routine of, the appointments, whatever. They checked me. I was still zero everything. I was 0% dilated, 0% effaced. Nothing was going on. But they did realize that my blood pressure was elevated. And so my OB kind of came in and we just kind of sat down, and she's like, well, I mean, you're 40 weeks already. So why don't we just go ahead and schedule you for an induction, that night. She said just to be there by 6:30, and we'll just kind of go from there. So me and my husband left the hospital, and my OB said, go home, get your bags finalized and packed and everything, get some sleep, and make sure that you get a nice big dinner before you come, because you have a long road ahead of you. And so we get home. We're kind of just putting some last minute stuff in the bags, and then I get a call from my OB, and she's like, hey, so before they'll let me just kind of schedule you for an induction, the hospital wants you to come in and do some testing and have them check your blood pressure again. So I was like, okay. So we left the house, we went to the hospital, they ran some tests and stuff, and they did, check again, and I still had elevated blood pressure. So at that point, they just went on and admitted me. I don't know why I figured that we would go to the hospital, they would check my blood pressure, and then they would let me go home, so I could finish packing my bags and stuff, and then we could go back to the hospital. I don't know why I thought that. I guess just pregnancy brain. But they didn't let me go home. They admitted me. They put me in just a regular, it wasn't a labor and delivery room at that point. They just put me in a regular room. And we were starving. Obviously, we hadn't eaten anything. So my mom actually brought us Pizza Hut. And at that point, when my mom was at the hospital, my husband went home and got our bags and just kind of finished up things at the old homestead, and came to the hospital. And at that point, I think around 7 or so at night, they gave me Cervidil just to kind of help soften and plump everything up for labor, because I was nothing. So, and so they gave me that. They also gave me something to help me sleep, because they definitely wanted me to get some good sleep. So I was actually able to have a good night's sleep. I think, if I can remember correctly, they started my Pitocin at 7 in the morning. That would be the 12th. So I woke up at 5, got up and took a shower, washed my hair, just that kind of stuff. And then at that point, they moved me to a labor and delivery room. at 7 in the morning, and they started my Pitocin. And so they started that, and after about 3 hours or so, I was like maybe 1 or 2 centimeters dilated. I can't remember the exact, but I was maybe like 1 or 2. And they just decided to break my water. And so they broke my water, and a couple hours later, I started running a fever. What had happened is they broke my water too early, and I started getting an infection. And as any of you guys know, any moms, anybody that has a baby, what they had told me is once your water breaks, you have 24 hours to have the baby, or you have to go in for a C-section. And at that point, like, I was just already upset, and I was kind of like, okay, like, why would you guys break my water after 3 hours? Like, I started off absolutely nothing. And it's just like, they just kept on, they just like wanted to rush me. They're like, let's just get it done, you know? And it was like they killed my body with the Pitocin and everything, and breaking my water. Like, they were just rushing me, and I really, really felt it. And, so I think they just gave me like ibuprofen, something to help with the fever and stuff. And they just kept on saying, okay, well, you know, if you don't, you know, if you're not at this centimeter by then or whatever, we're probably going to start looking at just having a C-section. And I like flat out said no. Like, I have 24 hours. So in hour 23, if things are not progressing, then we'll go in for a C-section. But I was like, you're going to let me have my time to let my body try to catch up with all these medications and let it do its job. And at that point, like, I just was just ticked off, and I wasn't happy with the situation at all, which I know all birth plans and stuff, they never actually go how you want to, but I really, really feel like they didn't give my body enough time for anything before they just started rushing it. Hours and hours go by. Now, keep in mind, I was in labor for 28 hours. So, I started progressing and everything, and around 1:30 or so, I was finally at 10 centimeters. And so they're like, okay, so you can start pushing now. And at that point, I think maybe like an hour before, they had given me another round of like the epidural. So like at that point, I was super numb. And so they're like, well, start pushing. And I'm like, I don't feel anything. Like, I don't feel contractions. I can't move my legs. Like, I can do anything. And they're like, well, let's just try, you know, start the practice pushing, I think they called it, you know, since I was a first timer. So we started doing the practice pushing, and I pushed for 2.5 hours. And at the end, I was exhausted. I was crying. I was moody. I was snapping at everybody. Like, if somebody would move an inch, if somebody would talk, I just got so upset. And I delivered, it's a pretty small city. It's called Maysville, Kentucky. And so it's a pretty small hospital. And for some reason, I guess everybody else in labor and delivery, like the whole like labor delivery unit, had already had their babies, and like everything was fine. And so when it came time for me, I felt like there was like 5 doctors, like 10 nurses in my room. Just all these people were just like in my room, which it didn't really bother me, because at that point, like, I was just done. Like, I was in pain. I was tired. I just wanted to get it done. But it bugged me so much, because there was just like people in like the corners of the room talking. And I remember at one point, the epidural had wore off, and I had been pushing forever. And I finally was just like, can you guys stop talking? Like, stop. Don't just come into my room while I'm giving birth, just have like a little chit chat. Like, if you're gonna be here, do something. I was not nice. But I didn't care. So, at 4:04 a.m. on October 13th, my daughter was finally born. I was so happy. She was born 6.6 ounces and 19.5 inches long. And I remember like the feeling of like her shoulders and stuff coming out. And it was just like, I just gasped. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's done. Like, I did it. And they laid her on my chest and I just started crying. I was like, oh baby, oh baby. That's the first thing I said. I was like, oh baby, oh baby. And I remember she was on my chest and I was so in love. Like, I was just looking at her and she was crying and I was just holding her. And I can't remember what they were doing, but then they came and took her to like get her measurements and stuff. Guys, I fell asleep. I fell asleep. They took her and I just remember I was looking over because it was like across the room and they were like talking, and I just remember I was just like, I can't keep my eyes open. So I closed my eyes and I fell asleep for a good 5-10 minutes. And then I woke back up to them putting her back on my shoulder. I'm like, whoop, I'm awake. I was so exhausted. I could not keep my eyes open. And they're like, she's a healthy baby girl. And I'm like, yeah, So that was kind of my first birth story, which it was pretty traumatic. Honestly, guys, after that happened, I really, really was like, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to have any more kids. Like, it was just super traumatic to me. My body, like, I was so tired. I had to stay after birth for 2 days, so they could monitor me because of the infection that they gave me for breaking my water too early. And, it was just not a good situation, which I know that all birth stories, they never actually go, how you like plan them in your head. They never do. But I was just like, that was just like traumatic. Like, I don't know. It just was really, really traumatic to me. So, my son's birth was not as bad. And my son, he was born March 27th of 2019. And we just went on and scheduled an induction for 39 weeks. My OB just gave me the option. She was like, this is your second kid. You've done it before. We can just go on and schedule your induction at 39 weeks. And at first, I really didn't want to. I really wanted to do it naturally just because I wasn't able to do it naturally with my daughter, and that's really, really what I wanted to do. But then I started thinking, I'm like, it would be so much easier just to have it scheduled. So I know that I have like a babysitter and stuff for my daughter, and I can just kind of like have everything set in stone and have a battle plan instead of like, my water breaking in the middle of the night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody get up and, let's get her to, wherever she's going and then get to the hospital, that kind of stuff. So we just went on and scheduled his induction for 29 weeks. And they wanted us to come into the hospital March 26th at 9 p.m. And so my parents came and got my daughter that afternoon. And then me and my husband kind of started heading to the hospital. We stopped at Cheesecake Factory for dinner. So we were sitting there just eating dinner. And I got a call from the hospital and they're like, hey, you're supposed to come in for your induction at 9, right? And I said, yeah. And they're like, well, we don't really have a room, so just like hang out. And I told her, I was like, we're like an hour from home because the hospital where my OB like delivers babies at is about 45 minutes away. So we just left early. We're like, well, we're already in Lexington. And she's like, okay, well, just give it a little bit and then just kind of come in and you can just like wait around. I'm like, okay, well, gee, thanks. So we get to the hospital, we kind of wait in the waiting room, and there was like 2 other women that were there waiting to get induced as well. So we just kind of like sat and chatted, and it was kind of cool just to like sit and talk. And then they came out, they're like, okay, well, we have a room for you. I'm like, okay. So we get back to the room, and they immediately just start me on Pitocin. And I was already 1 centimeter dilated at that time. So they started Pitocin at around, I want to say like maybe 11. And things started picking up right away. I started having super regular contractions. And they were like, so do you want to get your epidural now? And I was like, no, I'm just going to hold off. I don't want to get the epidural right away because I felt like I've only been here for like 3 hours. Like, surely I can hold off longer. But I was like, do you have anything else that can kind of just like help with the pain a little bit? And they ended up giving me something through my IV. Now listen, I cannot remember what they gave me, but ladies, if they give you the option, take it. That stuff was like 10 times better than the epidural. Like, it, number 1, helped me sleep. Like, I was able to sleep. And number 2, it made you feel like you were, it honestly made you feel like you were like so drunk. And you were just like, what's going on? Like, that's literally how I was. And keep in mind, my husband was sleeping through this whole entire, like, he literally got into the room, like, fixed up his couch, and started snoozing. And so I'm literally sitting in the bed like, with contractions. One time he woke up and he looked over, he's like, so are you doing good? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I had that medicine, so I was doing fine at that time. And then I think maybe around maybe 5 in the morning or so, I did end up getting the epidural. And at that point, I was like 7 centimeters. So between 11 to 5, I had already progressed to 7 centimeters. So things were picking up, and I'm like, I'm gonna have this baby like soon. And I was like texting Mom, and I was like, you need to get here soon because like it's gonna happen. And so they ended up giving my epidural, and I mean, everything was going great. And then around 10:30 a.m. It was the scariest moment of my life. I was just sitting there. Me and my husband were just talking, and I was texting my mom because she was saying, okay, I'm on my way. We were just talking. All of a sudden, 4 nurses run into my room. And they looked at me and they're like, you need to move. Like, you need to flip over. We need to do that. And they just started like flipping me every which way. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is going on? And they're like, the baby's heart rate dropped and we can't find it. And it was the scariest moment of my life. It seemed like it was like 5 minutes, and they finally got me in like a sitting position, and they finally found his heart again. And it was so scary. I was crying. I started shaking. They put oxygen on me, and they found his heart, and then they were like, okay, everything's fine. I was like, what? They're like, okay, everything's fine. It's all good. I guess they said that his heart rate just slowed way down because of very, very intense contractions, which I couldn't feel because I had the epidural. But they like moved the monitors around, and they ended up finding him again. And so they're like, well, we want you to keep the oxygen on. I was like, okay. And about 10 minutes after that happened, my mom walked in, and like I was sitting there with oxygen. I was shaking, like I was physically shaking. And she was like, what happened? And I told her. And I mean, it got so bad that they were like yelling out the door for like the doctors to come in, because they were like this close to taking me in for an emergency C-section because they couldn't find it. They were panicking. I was panicking. It was like the worst thing on earth. But then once they found it, like everything was fine and it never happened again. So I labored for a little bit longer, and around 2 or so, 2:15, they came in. My OB came in and she checked me. She was like, okay, so you're at a 9. And she was like, my guess is it'll still be a couple of hours. And I was just kind of like, okay, like, I was kind of discouraged because I was really wanting him to be born earlier in the day, because I really wanted my daughter to be able to come to see him that day. And obviously I didn't want like her to be out like late and stuff. So I was like, okay. So and they were like, do you want to get another round of the epidural? And I said no. I was like, no, because he's coming soon. And they just kind of like, they're like, whatever, crazy lady. Like, okay, like he's not coming, but okay. And ladies, if your body tells you something, listen to it. Because if I would have taken that second round of epidural, I would have been screwed. Because they left, and I was just like, I'm just going to sit. So I sat in like the sitting position in the chair, and I literally was sitting there for maybe like 10 seconds. Then all of a sudden, I started screaming and crying. I was like, I felt so much pressure. I was like, he is right there. Like, he is coming out. He is coming out. And I was frantic. I was like, get the nurse in here. So my husband's like holding my hand, and my mom runs out and gets the nurse, and she was like, she feels like she needs to push now. And the nurse was kind of like, she like casually came in. She's like, so what's going on? And I told her like she could see like the tears running down my face, and I was like, he's right there, guys. Like, he's right here. Like, he's coming out. He is coming out. And she laid me back, which was like the worst thing ever, like laying back. And she was like, yep, you're right. He's right there. And she runs out and calls for my OB. At that point, my OB had already gone back to the office. But this was only like maybe 10 minutes after she had left my room. But the office is connected to the hospital. And so all of a sudden I see my OB running into the room, and she was like, okay. She was like, you weren't kidding when you said that you didn't think it was going to be very long. And she put like her gown and everything on, and I got into the position and I pushed 4 times. It took 5 minutes and he was out. And I really, really think it helped sitting up, because like he was already like right there, that it wasn't like the initial like trying to like push him down, because he was like already right there, like he was ready to come out. So and I literally was like, I'm not gonna push for 2.5 hours like I did with her. I was like, I'm going to just go for it. And that's exactly what I did. Like, I just bared down and went for it. And 5 minutes later, 4 pushes later, he was born. And it was the easiest. Like, there was no screaming. There was no, like, it was with my daughter. Like, I was screaming, crying in pain. There was just nothing. That I could feel every contraction because I didn't have the epidural. Like, I had no medication at that point. So when I was having a contraction, it was painful and I could feel everything. But it just didn't seem as bad as it was the first time. And which is crazy because he was heavier than she was. He was born 6'11" and 20 inches long, and just born as healthy as can be. And the doctor was like, well, I mean, I'm really, really glad you listened to yourself, because if I would have got the second round of the epidural, I would have been so drugged up and so numb, I wouldn't have been able to push. So he would have just like had to wait, or just like, I don't know, come out on his own, because he was ready to come out. So definitely listen to your bodies, because my mind and my body was saying, don't do it. Do not do it. Do not listen to them, because he's coming out. That was the first time I had a doctor actually apologize to me, because she was like, I really should have listened to you. Because I told her, I was like, are you sure you really think it's going to be a couple of hours? Because I was like, it seems like he's going to be here pretty soon. She's like, no, things will start slowing down a little bit. And she's like, I don't see it being very soon. 15 minutes later, he was out. And with him, we asked to be released 24 hours. And so it was a little bit after 24 hours, just because they had to do like the hearing test and everything on the baby once he's 24 hours old. So as soon as he got that done, and he was circumcised, which I'm not even going to get into that. That's just what me and my husband decided to do. He was circumcised and everything. We were able to leave the next day, which was great, because I wanted to get home. Get settled in and get my daughter and everything like that. So it was really, really nice being released that early. The only kind of sucky thing about that is because we had to go into his pediatrician the next morning to do like the routine checkup after birth that they would do in the hospital. So that was kind of annoying. Like, you know, the first night at home is always the hardest and the worst. And so on top of that, like having to get up early, and, you know, like you're bleeding and swollen and sore and everything, and you just don't really want to leave the house. So that was kind of the only annoying thing about being released that early, but it's totally worth it. I don't sleep very good in hospitals. It was just awful. The one night that we were there for a total of 2 nights. The first night I was laboring. The second night we had him, and it was just awful. Like, none of us slept. I don't even think, for some reason, the recovery room, they didn't have a like a couch or anything. So my husband was like sleeping in a chair, and like he's at some point, like he tried to come and like lay in the bed with me, and obviously Hunter, you know, wasn't sleeping a lot and all that good stuff. So that's just kind of my birth stories. And another interesting thing with him, let's see, I'm trying to make sure that I covered everything. Yeah. The other thing with him was, which I said earlier with my daughter, that I gained 25 pounds. With him, I actually lost 10 pounds when I was pregnant with him. The morning sickness was awful for the first trimester. It was absolutely awful. And so actually every single visit I had at the OB, I was able to get an ultrasound, just because they were like monitoring the baby's growth, making sure that the baby was growing good and gaining weight, that it was just me that was losing the weight, and that's what it was. He came out perfect and healthy. I just lost 10 pounds while I was pregnant with him, which was nice, because that's just 10 more pounds that I didn't have to lose once I had him. So hey, that was nice. It was another score. So yeah, those are just kind of my 2 stories. I know a lot of women, and me myself, I love to watch birth stories and like hear other people's stories. So I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to my stories. And I just think it's kind of interesting that my labor and deliveries and stuff were so different with both of my kids, and they were both, you know, they were like different genders. I don't think that really had anything to do with it, but I just thought it was just like I had 2 completely different labor and deliveries. And for my next pregnancy, obviously it won't be my baby, it'll be a surrogate baby, but I'm super excited to kind of see like how that labor and delivery ends up, and how that's gonna go. Super excited. So I am going to be doing pregnancy updates and stuff once I have my transfer day, and I'll do like weekly updates, like weekly pregnancy updates and stuff. So I definitely want to keep you guys in the loop. So if you want to see those updates, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification button so you can get notified when I put a new video up. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye-bye.